Cruise ships are often described as floating paradises. But what if I told you that some cabins keep you from leaving despite the buffets, laughter, and views of the ocean? You will hear about 4 verifiable, cross-checked, and unbelievably scary encounters tonight. These admissions from folks who vowed never to set foot on a ship again are more than just stories. You won't want to miss what's waiting below deck. So settle in, turn down the lights, and, if you dare, strike the bell and subscribe to Untold Happenings. He was seated by himself at the windowsill at the dining table, looking out at the waves as though he had been waiting for me when I first noticed him. His attire was rather outdated, and he had a courteous grin, but there was something in his gaze that made me uneasy, as if he knew me. Until later that evening, when I heard the crew muttering that his name wasn't on the manifest, I didn't give it any thought, that he had never set foot on the ship. Daniel Grant is my name. To be honest, I booked this trip because I needed to feel human again. I'm an accountant from Ohio, and I'm 38. My apartment seemed like a tomb, although only a month before, divorce papers had been signed. I took a vacation because my coworkers almost pleaded with me to. Aurora Majesty, at sea for 7 nights. The first day was just what I had anticipated. Packed pools, the aroma of cooked burgers and sunscreen, and the constant conversation of contented families. After overindulging in the welcome buffet, I dozed off in a lounge chair and woke up to the sound of steel drums reverberating over the deck. It was meant to be a new beginning. Then the second day arrived. It was then that I saw him. The man beside the window. He was dressed in a cream-colored blazer, similar to those seen on vintage cruise posters, with a light blue shirt underneath. His hands were absolutely motionless on the table, and his dark hair was slicked back, if a bit unkempt. His food was never touched. He gave me a courteous nod as I looked at him, like a recognition almost. I hastily averted my eyes in embarrassment. Perhaps he preferred to eat by himself, or perhaps he had simply boarded in silence. Later, though, as I made my way back to my cabin, I came across 2 crew members near the stairway who were whispering to one other. There is no record of him. Who checked him in then? No one, that's the issue. I listened and slowed down, but they saw me and grinned as if nothing had happened. I still remembered the words, "No record of him." I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched that night. Small but tidy, my cabin was cozy enough, and the constant hum of the engines lulled me to sleep. However, I awoke at around 2 in the morning to the sound of footsteps outside in the hallway. Slow, steady, they came to a halt before my door. I stared at the glimmer of light under the door frame, holding my breath. A long, motionless shadow moved across it. I nearly yelled, but my inner voice told me to hold back. The shadow then bent slowly, as if someone were crouched to see under the door. "This isn't happening," I said to myself, but a voice whispered back from the other side. "See you tomorrow, Daniel." I attempted to persuade myself that it had been a dream the following morning. Perhaps the voice, or the shadow, were merely the sounds coming from the corridor that made my half-conscious mind jumble. However, he was back in the breakfast lounge when I entered. Identical table, identical seat, same meal that hasn't been touched. When our gazes locked, he spoke this time. With a little smile, he said, "Good morning, Daniel." The sound of my name on his lips made my stomach turn, even though his voice was composed and courteous. I had never introduced myself to him. I retorted a smile. "Good morning." I hurried over to a far table. I hoped that perhaps he had heard my name someplace. Perhaps it had been mentioned casually by a crew member. But the apprehension stuck to me like a mist. I cornered a server close to the coffee station after breakfast. A young man with weary eyes, perhaps 20 years old. With a casual gesture toward the window table, I remarked, "Hey, that guy over there, blue shirt, cream blazer. Are you familiar with his name?" The waiter scowled after glancing over. "Sir, nobody is seated there." I blinked, perplexed. "What are you discussing?" "He's right there." However, the table was deserted when I turned around. "He was just," I stammered, and the waiter smiled nervously, but his eyes told me otherwise. He had some knowledge. He murmured quietly, "You should enjoy your vacation, sir," and hurried off. The remainder of the day flew by. Despite the deck's sunlight, the atrium's music, and the laughter around the pool, I was unable to unwind. I swear that every time I turned, I saw the cream blazer in the crowd. I met him again at the formal dinner that night. This time, I'm not seated. Observing me from close to the stairway, determined to find answers, I strode toward him. However, a staff member immediately stepped in front of me before I could get to him. The man in the blazer was gone when I looked past him and said, "Sir, please, this area is for staff only." I couldn't sleep that night, so I strolled the calmer decks after leaving my stateroom. At night, the ship's hum was more intense. The corridors were darker, and the ocean was not visible. I saw it at that moment, a door that I had never seen before, tucked between two maintenance closets. It's narrow. It was made of simple steel and had only one handle. It had neither a number nor a sign, and I heard voices faintly behind it. I initially assumed it was crew members speaking. However, the words were illogical. They weren't English. It had an odd rhythm, almost like chanting. With a racing heart, I pressed my ear closer. Then I heard my name, as clear as day. "Daniel." I staggered back, gasping for air, almost tripping. The corridor behind me was deserted. No crew, no travelers, only me. Suddenly, the door rocked, as though someone had slammed against it from inside. The noise reverberated down the hallway. I took off running. I continued until I was back in my cabin and had secured the door. But my stomach fell when I turned. A folded cream blazer was on my bed, my proportions, and there was a handwritten note in the breast pocket. "It's your turn tomorrow." I didn't get much sleep that night. The cream blazer was always folded nicely on my bed when I closed my eyes, with the message tucked inside like a warning or an invitation. The blazer was gone by dawn, not lost, lost. The bed was made to perfection, as if housekeeping had arrived and removed all traces of it. However, I had spent the entire night in my cabin. There shouldn't have been anyone inside. I bounded over to the front desk. With a well-practiced smile, the young woman behind the desk welcomed me. I insisted, "I need to talk to someone in charge. This ship contains a man who is not supposed to be here. He is aware of my name." Her smile wavered. "He's been inside my cabin." After a brief look around, she leaned forward. She fell silent. The words, "Sir, it's best not to talk about him," made me feel colder than denial ever could. A tall man in an officer's uniform came to my side and placed a hand on my shoulder before I could shove. "Mr. Grant, let's go for a walk." His hold was solid but not painful, yet I knew better than to resist. He led me into a little office and along a silent hallway. He closed the door behind him and spoke softly. "It would be best to forget whatever you believe you have seen. Sometimes, passengers drink too much and let their fantasies run wild. You get it?" With my heart pounding, I gazed at him. "You're implying that I had an image of a man who knows my name and is wearing a cream blazer?" I pictured him whispering at 2 in the morning outside my door. The officer clenched his jaw. He didn't respond. I applied more pressure. "Who is he? What is this?" At last, his voice was hardly audible above a whisper as he drew closer. "Mr. Grant, if you value your life, spend tonight in your cabin. Keep the door closed." He abruptly left me sitting there, trembling, saying, "Don't answer if you hear him." In an attempt to blend in with the crowd and act as though nothing was happening, I went back to the atrium. However, I froze as I came upon a row of framed pictures of the ship's captains taken over the years on the wall, because he was there, a man wearing a cream blazer, younger, but definitely not the same. His 1965 portrait. Hail, Captain Richard. I felt cold. He couldn't be alive now if he had served as captain in the 1960s. With the desk chair pressed up against the door, I locked myself in my cabin that night. With the TV humming softly in the background, I kept the lights on. The footsteps arrived at precisely 2 in the morning. Stable, slow, stopping just outside. With every nerve screaming, I tightened my grip on the chair. The voice then emerged. "Be calm. Be patient. I pinched my eyes tight and said, "Daniel, open the door." The tone of the voice sharpened. More volume. "It's time, Daniel." The lock then turned by itself with a metal moan. Inward, the door swung. And there stood Captain Hale, his eyes as dark as the sea outside his immaculate cream blazer. "It's your turn," he muttered. The air became thick as soon as Captain Hale entered, as if the oxygen had been drawn from the space. Every instinct told me to run as my chest constricted, but my legs remained immobile. He was just a few feet away, his spotless blazer buttoned, his skin waxy and colorless as though it had been drained of life. He fixed his unwavering, limitless gaze on mine. I muttered, "You shouldn't be here." He gave a small smile. "No one ought to, but there's only one way out, once you step onto this ship." My throat felt parched. "What are you saying?" He took a step forward. "Balance is necessary for any journey. A toll is demanded at each crossing. You were selected for that reason." My thoughts raced. Selected for what? I noticed activity in the corridor behind him. Silently, dozens of passengers filed in. Their eyes were hazy, their faces blank. They weren't entirely living. Some of them I knew. The young pair from the meal. I had noticed the elderly man playing cards. Even the person who had warned me at reception. They all waited, standing still. The cabin was filled with Hale's steady, quiet voice, as if he had said this countless times. The ship sails safely when the ocean claims one. The ship sinks when the ocean is denied. The law of passing is that. That is the agreement we uphold. It suddenly struck me. The abductions, the murmurs, the notes. I wasn't witnessing arbitrary tragedies. I was getting ready, well-groomed. The toll was me. "No," I replied, violently shaking my head. "This isn't real, no." Hale twisted his head, saying, "This can't be real. Daniel, do you believe you got on the ship by accident? Your ticket was purchased months ago. Tell me, do you even recall making the reservation, or did you just get here?" And suddenly, I couldn't remember anything. When I purchased the ticket, I was unable to see it. I couldn't recall discussing this trip with anyone. I couldn't even remember how I packed my backpack. I had just woken up in this place. The sea's beat appeared to pulsate through the walls. The people, who were silent, gathered in a circle around me. Hale held out his hand. "Daniel, take one step." My heart slammed into my ribs as I backed against the wall. "One step, and the rest sail free." "Once again," he whispered. It was your time. The lights wavered. For a brief moment, I was outside, standing on the ship's railing with the black ocean yawning below, rather than in my stateroom. Salt burned my eyes as the wind blasted my face. The travelers had left. Hale was standing next to me, his hand still extended. He said, "Jump, and you'll understand at last." And I became aware of something even more dreadful than death at that same instant. The passengers' expressions, the lifeless compliance, the blank looks were not unfamiliar. All of them had previously declined. They hadn't leaped. They had remained. They were his now. The metal twisted as if it were alive, and the spacecraft moaned. In the breeze, I could hear voices chanting, pleading, and demanding. I shut my eyes, and I was gone when I opened them once more. Another cruise set out a few weeks later. The illusion of paradise is alive again, with families smiling and beverages flowing. Additionally, a young woman saw a folded cream blazer on her bed when she arrived at her cottage on the first night. There was a message in the pocket. "Your turn." Story 2. The water is said to be memoryless. Until the night the sea screamed my name, I didn't think that. The name Daniel Rivera is mine. I am a 32-year-old Florida high school history teacher. I took the Aurora Voyage trip last summer to commemorate the conclusion of a demanding academic year. Even though I wasn't wealthy, I had saved up enough money to treat myself to a nice vacation. All I wanted was a week off from grading papers, sunshine, and buffets. When I first saw the ship, its glass towers, polished decks, and people waving from balconies gave the impression that it was a floating city. Everyone appeared excited as they clinked glasses and took pictures. It was full of laughing, vibrant, and safe. This trip might change me, is something I even recall saying myself. I simply didn't realize how correct I was. It was a typical first day. Too typical. Children playing on the pool deck, a corny comedy show, and dinner in the grand hall. A young man traveling alone, a quiet woman who didn't talk much, and an older couple from Ohio were among the folks I met at my table. They were decent enough. However, each time I glanced at the dining hall's far corner, I saw a cluster of crew members. They weren't consuming any food. They had no laughter. They were all sitting motionless, gazing at the same silver pocket watch that was set in the center of their table. I recall laughing it off. "It's probably a crew game," I said. "Even so, Miss Stomach wrenched." I observed something strange on my way to my cabin that evening. Compared to the rest of the ship, the hallway felt colder. The slight seawater odor in the air was heavier than it should have been inside. Light caught subtle traces, such as scratches or carvings on cabin doors. At one, I paused and used my finger to trace it. There was a line running through the circle. I blinked, and it vanished. Just wood that's smooth. I was exhausted, I told myself. However, I believe I heard voices coming from the vent as I slipped into bed. Layers upon layers of whispers. Not in English. I didn't know any languages. The fog arrived the following morning. The horizon was swallowed by something thick and weird. We were unable to see the sun or the ocean. "Nothing to worry about, folks. Just a little sea mist," the cruise director said in a bright voice that cracked slightly. However, if you've ever seen fog over open water, you know what I mean. It wasn't mist. It was a wall. The Ohio couple appeared frightened over breakfast. "This isn't the first time," the spouse said in a whisper as he leaned in my direction. "The Aurora, she disappears. Every few years." His wife's eyes darted around the dining room as she firmly grasped his hand and shushed him. I chuckled uneasily, but then I realized that everyone on the crew was observing us. Not grinning, not even blinking, simply observing. I had trouble sleeping that night. I heard 3 knocks on my cabin door at precisely 2:13 a.m. Slow. Intentional. Every muscle in my body tensed as I froze. The whisper then came. "Daniel." I remained motionless, didn't take a breath. However, the corridor was deserted when I eventually made myself look. Just the never-ending fog against the porthole. I felt like I was going crazy, until I noticed the mirror in the bathroom. Words, written in damp, smudged across it. My hands trembled as I wiped it clean, my heart racing so hard I thought I may pass out. 5 simple words. "Don't let them choose you." I was about to turn away when the words reappeared, new, dripping. I knew then that the person who had written it was not in my room. The mirror contained them. "I must ask you this. Would you fight to get off a ship where the water itself knew your name? Or would you accept that you had already been picked?" I didn't get any more sleep that night. Every creak of the ship's hull seemed like something breathing directly outside my door, and every shadow in the cabin seemed alive. I was worn out in the morning. My eyes were sunken and my face appeared pallid in the toilet mirror. However, the words were erased, as if they had never been said. It must have been a hoax, I told myself. Perhaps a drunk passenger or a member of the cleaning crew is playing tricks on me. That justification helped me stay composed long enough to participate in the day's events. There was a cooking demonstration, a karaoke competition, and trivia by the pool. Everyone was intent on acting as if nothing was amiss. However, the fog remained. White and oppressive, it crushed against the windows, shutting out the outside world. No sun, no horizon. We were alone in a monochrome void. "Are we still moving? Is the ship even going anywhere?" I heard people muttering. I sat with a reserved woman from the first night during lunch. When she did speak, it was in a low, raspy voice. "Did you not see it?" she inquired. "What did you see? I made myself laugh." She fixed her gaze on mine and said, "The writing. It comes for the ones they mark." A crew member stepped out from behind her before I could reply. Tall, rigid, and overly beaming. "Miss, you've been requested at the bridge," he murmured, placing a hand on her shoulder. She froze, clearly shaking. She was taken away without any further explanation. She did not return for supper. Announcements continued as usual that evening. Don't miss the dancing party on Deck 5 tonight. Bingo in the lounge at 9 o'clock. The phony happiness annoyed me, because half of my dining table's passengers had left by then. Their seats are just vacant. No justification. Nobody discussed it. The husband from Ohio did not look at me. The lonesome young man merely gazed into his drink. At last, I inquired, "Where is everyone?" With his lips quivering, he glanced at me and muttered, "Offerings." He then got up and left his dinner unfinished. I walked the top decks later, restless. I saw it at that moment. A line of crewmen, silhouettes moving in sync in the fog. They struggled to hoist the hefty object they were carrying over the railing. The silence was broken by a muffled cry. Then there was a splash. I felt like screaming. I desired to sprint towards them. However, my legs became immobile. Then they all turned their heads at once, as though they could sense me. Numerous faces were looking directly at me through the fog. Chest tight and gasping for air, I staggered back to my cabin. I tried to tell myself I had just dreamed it inside. However, I felt sick to my stomach when I switched on the cabin light. The mirror. The words had returned. They had changed, though, this time. My hands trembled so much that I dropped the glass of water I was carrying. "You're next." I wanted to destroy the mirror, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't make a difference. The glass did not contain the person who wrote those words. The ship had it. I gripped my phone as I sat against the wall, but there was no service. No GPS, just the constant murmur of the sea and the soft hum of engines. At that point, there was another knock. 3 slow knocks, followed by the sound of my name, stretched out in a voice that didn't sound human. I remained motionless. I held my breath, but then I came to a realization. The hallway was not where the sound was coming from. It originated within the mirror. Tell me, would you dare answer your name if it were called by your mirror in the middle of the night? That was the last time I slept. I sat motionless, staring at the mirror as though it may move by itself. "Good morning, passengers. Breakfast buffet is open on Deck 9. Weather's looking perfect for another day at sea," was the morning announcement that sounded over the speakers after hours of waiting. The falsehood that shocked me the most was that one. There was only fog, no sky, no sun. Desperate to see others and feel less crazy, I staggered out. The corridors were nearly deserted. Doors to the cabin that were supposed to be open for cleaning were closed. As I walked past door number 1026, I heard the smallest sound coming from within. It was chanting neither movement nor speech. Rhythmic, low, like a chorus of voices whispering together. I quickly retreated, my heart racing. It didn't feel much safer during breakfast. As if supplies were running low, the buffet line was just partially stocked. The crew continued to smile too broadly and phonily. Their eyes never blinked, I noted. Like performers reciting a script they've read 100 times, they moved fluidly. The young tourist, who was the only person I recognized, sat down with me. He dropped his orange drink because his hands were shaking so much. He said, "They're taking people at night. You are selected if your cabin is marked." "Selected for what?" I inquired. He glanced around uneasily. "For the sea." A crewman wearing white gloves showed up at our table before I could press him any farther. It wasn't a request when he said, "Sir, the captain would like to speak with you privately." It was an order. The youth's face turned pale. No, please," he muttered, shaking his head, but 2 more crew members showed up and took hold of his arms. After letting forth a single piercing scream, he vanished. The whole dining room continued as if nothing had occurred. Clinking forks, small conversation, grins. I pushed a chair up against my cabin door and fastened it that night. I sat up, holding a broken light as an improvised weapon. Perhaps I could wait until morning, I reasoned. The mirror, however, had different ideas. The glass initially just rippled, as if a rock had disturbed the water. A pale hand then brushed against the interior, its fingers scraping as if it were attempting to penetrate. Something else, something with my face but vacant eyes, took the place of my own reflection. Then it started talking. "It's easier if you don't fight," I said to myself, not aloud, as I dropped the lamp and stumbled back. Behind my smirking duplicate, I saw faces I recognized, shapes, dozens of them. The wife from Ohio, the silent lady. From breakfast, the young guy dragged himself. With their mouths moving in mute cries, everyone was watching through the glass. There was another knock, 3 slow knocks. They didn't originate from the door or the mirror this time, though. They sprang from my bed's underside. I snatched the chair and pushed it out of my way while groping for the handle. However, the hallway wasn't there when I opened the door. I was standing on the open deck instead. Thick, living fog whirled around me. A circle of crew workers wearing white gloves was chanting in the middle of it. Something writhed in their hands, a body. When I realized it wasn't a stranger, my blood froze. I was the one. I was being carried toward the railing by them, limp and unresisting. I glanced at my own hands, but they were transparent. My heart thumped. The air wasn't hazy from my breath. There, I wasn't standing. Somewhere else, I was stuck. The cool glass against my back was the next thing I felt. I was captured by the reflection. So tell me, would you attempt to save yourself from being sacrificed to the sea? Or do you question which you they are actually hurling overboard? There was a devouring sound as the fog closed in. The crew's voices sounded like a hymn, reciting words that I didn't understand but could feel in my bones. The other me, my limp body, was hoisted up onto the railing. I let out a scream, but it was heard as stillness. I attempted to claw at one of the workers, but my ghostly hands went straight through him. They failed to notice me. Only the version of myself they were carrying was visible to them. At the center, tall and stiff, with his cap pulled low, stood the captain. I could tell his eyes weren't human when he eventually raised them. They were unending and hollow, the same shifting gray as the fog. He intoned, "This ship can only sail because the sea is fed, and the sea takes him tonight." My body was tossed overboard by the crew. I anticipated anything like a splash or thrashing water. However, there was absolutely no sound. As if it had never been there, my body just vanished into the mist. All of a sudden, my surroundings changed. Black water dissolved the deck. The chanting turned into hushed tears, and the lost were all around me, not the crew or the passengers. In the black sea, faces drifted about me, their mouths opening and closing in mute supplication, their eyes wide. My arm was touched by the Ohio wife's hand. The young tourist fixed his gaze on mine. As if they had been underwater for years, dozens more reached out, their skin swollen and pallid. Though no mouths moved, they all muttered, "You're one of us now." There was no surface, so I thrashed, trying to swim upward. Just more faces, more gloom. Then I sensed a pull, something encircling my ankle. I noticed ropes dragging me deeper when I peered down. They were thick and slippery with seawater. The crew was at the end of them, their white gloves immaculate even here, their smiles shimmering faintly beneath water. I gasped, but no bubbles came out. No, I shouldn't be present. That's when my mirror reappeared in front of me, clear even in the water. I didn't board this cruise to die. My duplicate with the sunken eyes grinned. You already did. In my cabin, I woke, or believed I did. Once more, the lamp was complete. The bed was set up nicely. Through the drapes, sunlight poured in. I believed it was all a nightmare for a little while. I opened the mirror after that. It was no longer glass. I could see the ship on the other side of the gently undulating lake. However, it was departing this time. I wasn't on it either. Rather, I stood barefoot on damp sand in a never-ending fog. There was no sound of waves, yet the ocean seemed black and endless, just quiet. The ship will return. It always does. And when it does, you'll help us welcome the next passengers. I ask you this, if you were me, would you pray that you never see that ship again? Or would you worry about what would happen if it sailed without you? Dozens of voices started whispering behind me, and they all suddenly blended into one thought. Story 3. I didn't give cabin 1031 much attention when I originally passed it. I knew something was off after the second time. The number of the hallway was changed from 1030 to 1032. Just a blank wall with no door or handle. However, I swear I heard someone sobbing from within at night. Rachel is my name. I'm a 29-year-old travel blogger. I review cruises, take pictures of them, and write about the hidden treasures that can be found on board. By no means was this my first journey. I had already gone on 3 cruises with this business. However, I had never seen the cabin that shouldn't have been there before. Food everywhere, countless activities, and a cheerful team that seemed to work around the clock without losing their character were all part of the first 2 days, which is precisely what I usually tell my readers. I snapped pictures of the top deck pool flashing neon blue at night, the unending buffets with ice sculptures, and the marble-floored atrium. My fans adored it. I did not, however, post about cabin 1031. Because I heard it the first night I passed that area, a slight noise, not the ship's engines humming or the typical creak of pipes. It had a softer texture, rhythmic, as if they were quietly crying into their hands. Between 1030 and 1032, I came to a halt and gazed at the wall. No door, no plaque with numbers. Like every other hallway, it is only paneled with metal. However, the sobbing continued. "Hey?" I instantly regretted whispering that. The noise stopped. Quiet. It must be thin walls, I assured myself. It might have been someone in 1030 or 1032, but the cabins weren't completely soundproof. But the uneasiness stayed with me. I mentioned it in passing to my waiter at lunch the following day. After a moment of hesitation, he smiled once more. "Ma'am, there isn't a 1031. You must have been worn out. It's possible that you misinterpreted the statistics, but I hadn't. I'm aware of what I observed. I forced myself to go down the same hallway once more that evening. Initially, there was only quiet. My heart started to calm down. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps I had dreamed it. Then I heard a whisper as I went by the blank wall. At first, I almost believed it to be my own thoughts because it was so faint. I froze and said, "Please let me out." It felt like you were standing inside a freezer since the air was colder. I hadn't touched my phone when the screen faded and then flashed. Refusing to turn my back on that wall, I slowly retreated. I sat trembling later in my cabin, trying to tell myself that was simply my imagination. However, my stomach fell when I looked at the pictures I had taken that day. Between 1030 and 1032, in one of the hallway shots, there was a door. It was faint and hazy, as if it had only partially appeared to the camera, and a number I wasn't supposed to see was engraved into the brass plate above it, 1031. I was unable to sleep after viewing that picture. I kept repeating it over in my mind. How could the camera record something my eyes were unable to see? I observed additional odd details the longer I looked at it. The door was not entirely sturdy. It appeared distorted, as though it was attempting to exist, but failing. Additionally, the license plate, 1031, appeared worn and scraped, as though it had been there for years. By daybreak, my fear had given way to curiosity. I required clarification. I pretended to be informal as I headed to guest services. "Hey, just a quick inquiry," I remarked, laughing. "Why does Deck 10's hallway skip between 1030 and 1032? Did 1031 just happen to be unlucky?" At the counter, the young man blinked. Then he tightened his smile. "No cabin is missing, ma'am. Maybe you didn't read the numbers correctly. It occurs more frequently than you might imagine." I pressed. "No, I did see it. And I even have a picture." His expression darkened. He muttered, "Delete that photo," in a voice so low I could hardly hear it. Then, more loudly, making one chuckle, "Anyway, can I be of any further assistance to you? Trips? Reservations for a meal?" I felt cold when his tone changed. He was afraid. I chose to put myself to the test that evening. At 2 in the morning, I went back to the hallway. With the majority of the passengers asleep and the passageways illuminated only by faint yellow lamps, the ship was eerily quiet. The sound of my footfall was too loud. My cell vibrated in my pocket as I got to the 1032 portion. Although my phone had been fully charged, I received a notice saying, battery critically low. I took it out. The screen struggled to remain on, flickering. The wall suddenly started to shift in front of my eyes. A dim silhouette of a door appeared, slowly, in agony, as if it were being forced through from the opposite side of reality. I didn't breathe. A handle developed, aged brass, tarnished. I'm not sure what possessed me to reach out. A few inches separated my fingertips. The metal appeared icy. Then it came to me once more. I pulled my hand back, saying, "Please, open it." This time, the voice was close to my ear rather than a whisper. I nearly tripped over my own feet as I staggered back. The door vanished as swiftly as it had emerged. Another blank wall. I saw something on the carpet when my pulse was pounding and I was trembling. A key. Brass, weighty and old. Not like the ship's plastic key cards, and numbers cut deeply into the metal were inscribed on its head, 1031. I confronted a crew member the following day, a middle-aged housekeeper with gentle eyes. She murmured, "Don't," after noticing me hanging around the corridor. "Stay away from that location." "Why?" Desperately I asked. To be sure no one was listening, she looked around. Certain cabins are sealed, not due to remodeling, not by chance, because they no longer belong here. I scowled. "What exactly does that mean?" She gave me a dead-eye glare. Things are occasionally taken by the ship, cabins, individuals, recollections. It also conceals them. However, they are not always hidden. They seep back through. "You discovered that." My skin shivered. She widened her eyes and said, "Cabin 1031. Avoid saying the number out loud. If you do, it hears you." A supervisor passed by before I could inquire further. The housekeeper quickly sprang up, murmured, "Pardon me, ma'am," and rushed away. I sat in my cabin that night and gazed at the brass key in my hand. I promised myself that I wouldn't. I was unable to. But it's the way it is. You were eaten up with curiosity. I returned to the hallway about 3 in the morning. Around me, the spacecraft moaned. The metal swelled and shrank. Now, the key was hot in my hand, pushing me forward. The door reappeared after that. It was completely solid this time, as though it had always been there. My throat tightened each breath. My heart was yelling at me to refrain. However, my hand moved anyhow. The key was slid into the lock by me. The air in the hallway altered as soon as I turned it. Heavy, quiet. The door opened with a click, and there wasn't a cabin behind it. It was a corridor, dark, never-ending, surrounded by doors that weren't part of this ship. Some were painted in vibrant hues from a bygone age. Some were made of iron, and some were decaying wood. Behind them, I swear, I heard voices murmuring in unidentifiable tongues. I ought to have fled. I ought to have banged the door. I went inside instead, and the door slammed itself behind me. The smell caught my attention right away, like wet stone that hadn't been exposed to sunshine for centuries. It was moldy and damp. Despite my phone flashlight barely penetrating the hallway, it seemed to go on forever and disappear into the darkness. "It was only a prank," I said in a whisper. However, even my voice sounded strange hollow, as if it were being absorbed by the walls. Just some sort of maintenance corridor. I went by the first door. Its wood was swelled with moisture and splintered. Scratches were carved into it, pulling hopelessly downward like fingernails. My stomach grew constricted. I continued to walk. There was no doorknob on the second door. There was just a tiny iron slit, and I believed I heard faint breathing coming from behind it. Shallow, ragged. I pressed my ear closer as I froze. A voice rasped, "Help!" My blood became icy. The voice was that of a man, feeble and desperate. "Who are you?" I whispered back, quietness. Then a slow, purposeful knock. 3 times. I retreated, my hand shaking. I knew deep down that I shouldn't have opened it. The corridor forked a little farther down. With the dim glow of ancient bulbs buzzing overhead, one way appeared more recent. The other way appeared to be older, with shadows and damp, decaying walls. I turned toward the dim light on the left. Maybe a minute later, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A bag, merely seated in the center of the corridor. Not old, but dusty. The type of luggage that every traveler would bring on board. With my heart racing, I knelt down and carefully turned the handle's tag. My breath seized in my throat as it said, "Passenger Rachel Carter, cabin 923. I owned it. However, my suitcase was still in my cabin. My hands trembled so badly when I unzipped it that I nearly lost my grip. My clothing were inside, packed nicely, but they were ancient and faded, like if they had been decaying for decades. And something that wasn't mine was nestled between them, a picture of a couple on the ship's deck grinning at each other. However, the ship had a different appearance, outdated, as though it were from the 1960s, and there was that identical door number in the backdrop, faint but discernible, 1031. I dropped the picture. My mind was racing. Above me, the lights flickered and suddenly died. I was abandoned to the dark, and I heard footsteps in that quiet, not behind me, slow, measured, approaching. With trembling hands, I swung my phone flashlight about, causing the beam to jitter wildly over the walls. Nothing. The corridor was vacant. However, the footsteps continued. I pressed back against the wet wall. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand and buzzed. The blank screen displayed a notification. Unfortunately, I hadn't recorded anything. One new voice memo saved. I opened it with a tap. The playback started right away. And because it was me, my heart almost stopped. My voice. "Don't follow the voices. Don't open the wrong door. The ship doesn't let go once it chooses you. If you discover this tape, it means I didn't make it out." The recording ended abruptly, interrupted by static. Panicked, I dropped the phone. The screen flickered and displayed lines of text I hadn't typed when I picked it back up. I exclaimed, "You shouldn't be here." In my ears, my pulse thundered. The walls felt closer, breathing almost. And I knew for the first time that I wasn't simply lost. They were watching me. I staggered back in the direction of where I believed the original entrance to have been, but the corridor was now twisted in unfathomable ways, branching into previously undiscovered corners. Although each door had a unique appearance, several of them carried faint numerals that had no business being on this ship. 212th cabin, 45th cabin. Cabin 7A. This deck should not have any cabins at all, and whispers from behind those doors. Increasingly loud, panic took control and my vision became blurry. With frantic breath, I slapped my fists on the walls and looked for the exit. Then, by itself, one of the doors at the far end creaked open, only a tiny bit. Just enough to let in some light, and there was a figure, a female, pale, sunken eyes, wearing an old gown that was yellowed with age. She gave me a direct glance. Then she grinned. "We have been anticipating your arrival." The door flew open, and I saw the water, I promise. Not quiet waters, not waves, but an unending dark sea with voices yelling from below that stretches beyond nothingness. The woman moved aside and motioned for me to come in. My entire body cried out for me to run, but I was dragged ahead by something more powerful. Because I envisioned myself standing there as I gazed into that impossibly large ocean. Another me, awaiting. I'm not sure if I was approaching the door or if it was drawing me in. It felt like something I couldn't see was pulling ropes, making my legs feel like they weren't mine anymore. I believe the air itself pushed at my back, pushing me forward as the pale woman's hand lifted. I scraped my nails into the wet wall until they bled, but the force was too much. Beyond the door, the ocean changed strangely, as if millions of things writhed beneath it. The sea blacker than night, the waves rising silently. Mouths opening in mute screams, faces press against it. "No," I muttered. "No, this isn't real." However, the alternate me who was standing at the water's edge raised her head. Her smile was big and artificial, and her eyes were hollow. She extended her hand in my direction. At that moment, all of the hallway's doors suddenly crashed open. The murmurs turned into cries. Children, mothers, men, all yelling. I caught a glimpse of pallid hands reaching for me through the cracks, bodies writhing in the darkness. The entire corridor trembled as if the ship were alive and furious. I let out a scream and ran back the way I had come. I caught flashes of faces pushed against walls and shadows darting just out of sight as the flashlight on my phone flitted frantically, cutting in and out. After what seemed like hours of running, I finally saw it. The first door, hardly perceptible in the dark. I shoved with all of my weight and slammed against it. For a terrible moment, it refused to move. Then it exploded with a loud crack, and I staggered into dazzling white light. I had returned to the typical hallway. The rug, the walls were polished. The ship's engines hummed softly. Gasping, I fell, tears streaming down my cheeks. As he turned the corner, a crew member narrowed his eyes at me and said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" My throat felt raw when I tried to speak. All I could do was gesture toward the door. He scowled after glancing over my shoulder. I turned back and said, "There's nothing there." He was correct. There was only a smooth wall where door 1031 had been. Nothing to see. As I stumbled to my feet, he radioed for assistance. They claimed that I was possibly confused and dehydrated. They told me to rest, gave me water, and walked me back to my cabin. However, I froze as soon as I entered. Sitting on the bed was my suitcase. It was not the one I had carried on board the ship, though. It was the rotten, faded one from the corridor, the one with my name tag on it. And the identical picture was hidden beneath the handle. The couple from decades ago, on the ship's deck. Now, however, there was another person in the photo. Me. Wearing the same pale gown as the woman in the hallway, she stood next to them, grinning. My gut churned. The staff hurried in, restrained me, and assured me that nothing was wrong while I yelled and shoved the luggage across the room. I had dreamed it, they said. Stress plays tricks, they remarked. However, I was aware of the reality. I closed myself in my cabin that night and shivered in bed until I was eventually pulled under by tiredness. And the intercom came alive at precisely 3 in the morning. I sat motionless, gripping the blankets, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. "Passenger Rachel Carter, please proceed to cabin 1031. The voice said it again, and again. Closer each time, sharper every time, until the speaker stopped delivering it. From the opposite side of my door, it came. At last, I looked up to see the shadow creeping through the crevices and curling its long fingers across the floor. I don't recall yelling. All I can recall is the door opening. Then, nothing. My cabin was deserted the following morning. No one had been assigned to room 923 that trip, the crew insisted. The manifest did not include my name. There was no ticket for me. However, several travelers claimed to have seen me consuming breakfast, lounging beside the swimming pool, strolling around the decks. They also hear it late at night, faint, like a whisper slipping through from the opposite side, as they go past a part of the lower deck wall that seems cooler than the others. Please continue to cabin 1031. Story 4. I initially believed it to be a dream when I heard my stateroom number being whispered via the ship's speakers. It cried out to another passenger the second time, just before she disappeared. By the third night, the voice was standing outside my door, wearing my face, rather than merely whispering from the ceiling. I'm Derek, a 32-year-old IT security specialist at a Virginia hospital. My sister booked both of our cabins side by side because she wanted us to spend time together and make up for years of seldom seeing each other. And even though I don't generally take vacations, she urged that I join her on this cruise as a chance to finally disconnect. I'll admit that at first, I wasn't convinced, but there was something about the ocean, the idea of being away from screens, alarms, and incessant emails that made me want to do it. And I suppose that's why I'm sitting here in this city-sized floating hotel. The first day of the cruise was just how everyone had imagined. Music resonating from the pool deck, the scent of salt in the air, waiters delivering trays of vibrant beverages, and sunlight glinting off the water like glass. The theater lounges, art galleries, buffet halls piled high with food, and even a cigar bar hidden away at the very top were all explored by my sister and me. It was secure, typical. I kept wondering if she was correct. Perhaps this was just what I needed. However, I heard it that night as I lay in bed, listening to the engine's hum as it lulled me to sleep. Before announcements, the ship's intercom crackled slightly, although initially there was no voice. Static only. I then heard the words, "Cabin 726. That was my cabin, and it came in softly, almost like a breath slipping into the room. I shrugged it off, even though my heart was racing. It was probably a glitch, or perhaps the speakers were leaking sound from another floor. The hair on my arms was still standing on end. I recall looking at the vent above the bed, certain that it was the source of the sound rather than the ceiling speakers. The following morning, I dismissed it. Kept my sister in the dark. Didn't want to come across as insane. After breakfast, which included omelets prepared to order and pancakes dripping with syrup, we made plans to visit the excursion desk. Everything appeared to be all right, too delicate, as if the ship was putting an extra effort to obliterate what I had heard. It happened again that second night. The awkward pause, the same static. However, it wasn't my cabin that was whispering this time. It was a different number. Cabin 514. I didn't give it much thought until my sister pushed me at breakfast the following morning and said in a whisper, "Did you hear? Last night, a woman vanished. My stomach fell at that. Her cabin, 514. It was only a coincidence, I told myself. It must have been. I might have heard the number incorrectly. It might have been rumors. However, the vision of that thin voice, winding through the speaker like smoke, would not leave me. I wasn't even interested in going to sleep by the third night. I remained awake with my eyes focused on the ceiling vent, and the lights dimmed. My throat constricted as the crackle began. It wasn't a cabin number this time, but the whisper reappeared. My name was that, Derek. My heart froze. The voice was now just outside my door rather than resonating from above. I strained to listen while I froze. Then I heard something that will always stick in my memory. Knuckles. Careful, slow knocks on the door. I didn't open the door after the final knock, but I could hear my own voice whispering back at me. Let me in. I was unable to. My whole body tensed up as though the slightest movement would reveal my identity. All I could hear in the cabin was the sound of my own faint breathing as I lay there motionless. After a moment, the knocks ceased, but the silence felt even more terrible. Then I heard someone or something moving a hand along the length of my door, lightly, like the scrape of skin on metal. Something seemed to be breathing directly against the bottom gap as a slight hiss of air blew out of it. I remained up till the drapes opened, and the first glimmer of light appeared. I didn't dare to move until then. That morning, the hallway appeared entirely normal when I opened the door. All night long, there was no evidence of anyone standing there. However, as I leaned down, I saw small smudges around the door's bottom edge, as if greasy fingerprints had been placed there and slowly pulled down. My sister complained about the slower service that morning over breakfast. Perhaps half the workforce had overslept, she laughed. I remained silent, but as I looked around the room, I became aware of an oddity. The staff did appear thinner. Entire tables sat in confusion. The buffet included several closed corners. Additionally, a few passengers were absent. "Where is the couple from last night's dinner?" my sister inquired. "The Florida ones? The elderly man and his spouse?" It wasn't until she said it that I realized their window seats were vacant. Silverware and plates are placed, but nobody is seated. The intercom clicked at that moment. They all froze for a second. Typically, it was upbeat music or a typical notification regarding events. This time, however, there was only a slight static crackling from the speakers. People on their seats shifted uneasily. "Good morning, passengers. Please disregard any rumors. All scheduled activities will continue as normal," said a calm, manly, professional voice. Brief, too brief, and I shuddered when he warned, "Disregard any rumors," as if they were aware of something we were not. A young woman working at the guest services desk was one of the crew members I confronted later that afternoon. Her smile wavered when I brought up cabin 514 when I asked her about the missing guests. She gave one uniformed officer standing close a short glance before responding, "Sir, I'm afraid I can't discuss other guests. Can I be of any further assistance to you?" Although she spoke in a courteous tone, her eyes sent a different message. I think I saw terror in their eyes as they scurried back to the cop. I made the decision that evening that I couldn't remain by myself in my cabin. I asked if I might spend some time crashing on my sister's couch when I knocked on her door. She didn't say no, but she did laugh at me. We spoke and watched movies on the little flat screen while staying up late. I was safe for a time. However, I heard it again after midnight when she was asleep. The static, the murmur. It was not from the ceiling this time. The television was off, yet it was the source of it. The tiny flickering of the dark screen seemed like static trying to get through. And I heard my name once more over that faint hum. Derek. But this time, a different voice added their voice. The name of my sister. I prayed she wouldn't wake up to hear it while I sat motionless, gazing at the television, because I wasn't sure if she would ever accept it as true if she did. She was gone the following morning. That morning, like a desperate child, I ran through her cabin, yelling her name and looking in the closet, bathroom, and even under the bed. Nothing. Her suitcase still had her clothing packed nicely. By the door were her shoes. She seemed to have just stepped outside and disappeared into thin air. I ran down the corridor and almost ran into two crewmen. They supported me with fake smiles, but as soon as I yelled that my sister was gone, their features immediately became stern. While one of them placed a hand on my shoulder, the other whispered something in a different tongue. "Please don't raise your voice, sir. We'll investigate. Sometimes passengers get lost. The ship is huge. Are you lost?" My sister wasn't a kid lost in the shopping center. She was diligent and thorough. She never simply vanished. With my heart racing, I shoved by them and hurried to the closest stairs. I just needed to keep traveling and looking. I had no idea where I was heading. The ship seemed a little strange everywhere I went. Doors that led nowhere, corners that became dead ends, and hallways that appeared to be longer than before. I attempted to head back to the atrium, but for some reason I found myself in a part I had never been in before. A small hallway with peeling paint, low lighting, and no other travelers in sight. It was there that I heard it once more, the murmur. This time, not from a speaker, from right behind me, Derek. I whirled around so quickly that I almost fell. The hallway was deserted. However, I briefly believed I saw someone walk around the corner at the far end, someone dressed like me, someone who moved just like I did. I didn't go after it. I was unable to. Rather, with my heart thumping my ribs and my head shouting that I was going crazy, I retreated into a stairwell. At last, I made myself return to guest services. I insisted on talking to the security guard, the captain, or anybody else. At the desk was the same young woman from earlier. This time, her hands were a little unsteady as she wrote something on her keyboard, and her grin was thinner. She leaned closer and murmured softly, "Sir, don't inquire here if you want answers. Proceed to Deck 3, midnight, the mess hall for the crew." I started to question more, but as soon as another passenger came along, she straightened up and put on the phony smile again. "Don't let anyone follow you." I wandered the ship in a fog for the remainder of the day, seeing couples clink wine glasses, families splashing in the pool, and entertainers strumming guitars in the lounges. People were going missing, but no one else appeared to notice. Announcements had become sharper, shorter, and more mechanical, but no one appeared to care. When midnight rolled around, I was in ruins. I went to Deck 3, a level that passengers weren't supposed to go to, with trembling hands. Down there, the hallways were different. They had buzzing pipes, plain metal walls, and a subtle oil and saltwater odor. I located the mess hall. Overhead, a single fluorescent light hummed. Inside, half a dozen crewmen sat with crumpled uniforms and pale expressions. As soon as I walked in, they all fell silent. I was waved over by the young woman behind the desk. "You're not supposed to be here," a fellow snarled. She retorted, "He deserves to know." She then turned to face me and said, "Pay close attention. Unlike other ships, this one sails differently. They need someone every few nights. Travelers, crew, it makes a decision. What about the voices you hear? They're not a problem. My blood froze. They're the ship calling its next offering. She lowered her voice to a whisper as she leaned closer. The name of your sister was called. You are powerless to prevent it. I asked her what the hell that meant. But before she could respond, the intercom above us crackled to life. But you can still save yourself if you leave before the final night. The room was static. Then it spoke again, as clear as day. The entire crew halted, their eyes wide with fear as Derek said, "Derek, it's too late," one of them murmured. Something inside me exploded the instant my name rang over the intercom. I shook my head, not believing it, and pushed away from the table. No, this is crazy. It's just a cruel joke. The team didn't quarrel, though. Or you people are messing with me. They made no effort to persuade me. They simply gazed at me as if I were a walking corpse. "You should run," the young woman muttered, and I staggered out of the meal hall, all my nerves screaming. The hallways appeared to bend about me, getting longer and twisting at unfathomable angles. Behind me, I could hear steady, deliberate footsteps that matched mine exactly. They stopped when I did. They accelerated when I ran. The ship was unnaturally silent by the time I exploded into the main atrium. No music, don't laugh. No glasses clinking. There were dozens of vacant seats and unfinished drinks, as though every traveler had suddenly gotten up and departed. "Hey," my voice broke. "Is there anybody present?" I noticed her at that point, my sister, standing in the atrium's far end. I felt a rush of relief that nearly left me lightheaded. "Where have you gone, God? I assumed you were—" She looked up. She had the wrong eyes. Too gloomy, too vacuous. Furthermore, it wasn't her smile when she grinned. My sister's mouth moved in perfect time with the hissing intercom overhead and the voice whispering, "Derek, let me in." My heart pounded against my ribs as I retreated, but the ship moved regardless of my direction. The hallways enclosed themselves. The stairs took me back to my starting point. Static flickered on every screen, and suddenly every whisper I heard was my own voice, reverberating about me. How long I ran is unknown to me. Perhaps hours, days. There was nothing but blackness outside the windows. Not a star, no moon, nothing except endless dark sea. I eventually returned to my own cabin. The door was ajar. The drapes were drawn and the bed was made up nicely inside. And I was seated on the bed's edge. He looked up and saw the same hands shaking, the same face, the same clothes. He gave me a feeble smile as if we were sharing some terrible secret. He muttered, "It's easier if you don't fight." It didn't matter that I staggered back into the hallway. I opened each door to reveal the same cabin. A different version of myself was reflected in each mirror I passed. Some were crying, some were smiling, and some were mumbling words I couldn't make out. The last thing I recall is the voice no longer whispering and the intercom cracking one more time. Like the captain's announcements used to sound, it spoke in a steady, calm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome our newest permanent passenger, Derek of cabin 726. And then, nothing. Weeks have passed since then. Months? I'm not sure anymore. I remain here. I'm still moving through these winding, repetitive hallways. Somewhere just out of reach, I occasionally hear music, laughter, and clinking glasses like the echoes of a cruise. The faces I see now, however, are not those of passengers. They are duplicates, thoughts. If this recording somehow managed to escape this ship, keep in mind this. When your name is called over the intercom, don't answer. Hold your breath, because there is no escape once it knows you. Story 5. Before I go entirely insane, I need to talk about something, even though I'm not sure if anyone will believe me. I don't say this to show you sympathy. Someone needs to hear this, so I'm telling you because perhaps, just possibly, if you ever plan a cruise, you'll know to double-check before entering an elevator that isn't supposed to be there. The name Daniel Rivera is mine. I work in IT back in Orlando, and I'm 34 years old. I'm more of a money-saving late-night server repair guy for businesses that can't even remember my name than a vacation guy. However, my sister persuaded me that I needed a vacation. She said that this week-long Caribbean cruise would rejuvenate me. I was unaware that I was lacking things like sunshine, free food, and ocean air. She purchased the ticket for me as an early birthday present, even though I wasn't excited about being crowded on a floating hotel with 3 strangers. So I went. What's the worst that could happen? Was what I kept asking myself during the first day. The crowd, the check-in procedure, and the overpowering scent of sunscreen combined with the subtle tang of diesel as the ship departed port. As the captain greeted everyone on board, I recall the news reverberating across the atrium. With a tiny porthole overlooking the limitless blue, my cabin was compact yet tidy. The air conditioner hummed steadily and softly, almost comfortingly, and the bed was softer than I had anticipated. That evening, by dinner, I was beginning to unwind. The buffet was ridiculous, with swan-shaped fruit displays, roast meat, and shrimp heaped on tables. When I returned for my third plate, my sister made fun of me. I recall thinking, maybe this won't be so bad after all. However, that first night, a minor, scarcely perceptible event occurred. After dinner, we were strolling around the ship, passing the lounges and stores, when I noticed it. An elevator was hidden behind a group of ornamental plants at the extreme end of a calm hallway. It appeared to go unnoticed. This one was different from the others, since it lacked a luminous display above the entrance in polished chrome. It had a brushed steel surface that appeared older than the rest of the ship, and it was simple, almost industrial. I mistook it for a service elevator, which the helpful staff used to move baggage and linens. The strange thing, though, was that as I passed by, the door opened. With a slight hiss, it pushed open just enough for me to see inside, but I swear I hadn't pressed anything. No lights were present, no carpet, nothing more than a metal box with a single button panel within. And the most peculiar aspect? The panel included a single button in place of the typical numbers, a downward arrow. I chuckled uneasily and gave my sister a shove, but when I turned around, it was closed. I pointed, but there was nothing there when she asked what I was looked at, only the plants and the wall. I dismissed it as my being too exhausted. Perhaps it was my imagination. Even yet, I kept thinking about that elevator door moving open by itself as I laid in my cabin that night. The following day was more promising. The sun was shining, and the lake had that dreamy blue hue you only see in tourist magazines as we docked at Nassau. I made an effort to enjoy myself by sipping a drink on the deck, watching children splash in the pool, and letting my face get stung by the salty wind. Everything was as usual, but I ended up going down that same passage that night when the ship was once again silent. I have no idea why. I wanted to convince myself that it wasn't genuine. Indeed, there it was once more, the elevator in question. The same door is made of brushed steel. The light above it flickered dimly this time, like a dying candle. The door opened again, and I froze. There was a faint groan of metal in the hall. The down arrow inside the button gleamed a pale red, awaiting a press. Then I heard a sound. Just enough, but not too loud. From inside the shaft, a sound drifted above. The sound of equipment wasn't it. It was voices, whispers. They rose and fell like 100 people whispering to each other, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. My throat became parched. I swear that for a little moment, I saw someone inside the elevator as I turned to go. A man, slender, tall, and dressed in what appeared to be a worn uniform. He was observing me from the corner, somewhat in shadow. The doors then closed, and it was gone as I took a step back and blinked once more. It was a sturdy wall, no elevator. I didn't get any sleep that evening. I thought I heard those murmurs again every time the air conditioner turned on. I began to observe something even unusual by the third day. Other travelers. Or, more accurately, their response when I brought up that corridor. I asked one of the waiters at breakfast if there was a staff space in the corridor by the stores. He stopped. A moment later, by the pool, I asked a couple we'd met the previous evening if they had noticed an elevator hidden behind the plants next to the stores. His courteous smile wavered briefly before he shook his head and said, "No, sir, there's nothing there. There's no elevator there, man. You're probably mixing it up with the ones near the casino," the husband scowled. His wife swiftly shifted the topic. Although it was slight, it seemed as though people didn't want to discuss it, rather than simply not knowing about it. This is where everything started to go awry, so pay close attention to what I have to say. On the third night, I was unable to control myself. I returned, this time alone. I'm not sure what I anticipated. Perhaps the elevator wouldn't exist at all, and I would be ashamed of my compulsive behavior. Perhaps I needed evidence that I wasn't going insane. However, the air felt heavier as I arrived in the corridor. The once tidily planted plants appeared withered, as if they hadn't had any water in days. And while the rest of the ship looked bright and pristine, the lights in the hall appeared dimmer and flickered weakly. The elevator was ready. Slowly, the doors opened like though they had been waiting for me. And I could plainly hear it this time, a voice. It was no longer a whisper. Deep within the tunnel came the low, distorted voice of a lady. "Daniel." My blood froze. She could not possibly have known my name. My heart slammed against my ribs as I staggered back. Whatever was inside was sealed off in the dark when the doors closed. I became aware that I was no longer alone in the hallway as I turned to run. At the far end, someone was standing, observing me. They vanished as soon as I blinked. However, I promise you that whoever it was looked just like me. I kept what transpired that evening from my sister. How was I able to? Because I wandered the corridors at all hours, she already believed that I was paranoid. She would have hauled me to the onboard doctor if I had told her that I had seen an elevator that didn't exist, that I had heard my name murmured inside it, and that I had seen myself staring from the end of the corridor. However, I also couldn't ignore it. I kept repeating the way the doors opened, and how that distorted voice had wrapped around my name each time I closed my eyes. I made myself go to the pool with her the following morning and pretend everything was normal. Kids were laughing and splashing in the water. The deck was packed with people in bikinis, and the air smelled of grilled burgers and sunscreen. However, I felt watched the entire time. Not by a single individual, just observed. We were eating at around midday when the PA made an announcement. I halted, burger halfway to my mouth, as the skipper calmly said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please note that certain staff-only areas of the vessel are restricted. Passengers are not permitted in maintenance corridors or service elevators." Why was that announcement made? Why now? My sister didn't appear to notice when I looked at her. She was chuckling at something while browsing through her phone. I made a promise to myself that evening that I would never return. I made a self-promise to remain in the cabin, observe the passing sea, and simply forget about it. But I heard it again around midnight. I heard that same voice over the constant hum of the air conditioner, through the thin cabin walls. Clear enough, but faint and far away. Sweating, I sat up and said, "Daniel." My sister's breathing was steady as she slept. The cabin was not the source of the sound. It came from the corridor. I got out of bed, opened the door slowly, and took a quick look outside, defying all conventional reason. With only the faint glow of nightlights down the floor, the corridor was deserted, and I saw it again far below, close to the turn that led to the stores. The light above the elevator flickered faintly. Before I knew it, I was getting closer thanks to my feet. Every step was more difficult than the last. I was having trouble swallowing since my throat was so dry. This time, the elevator doors opened silently. No metal moan, nothing but quiet. The inside walls were no longer made of brushed steel. They had a different appearance, rusted. It looked as though water had accumulated on the floor and never dried. Once more, the button gleamed a faint crimson. And I believe I felt something moving through the open shaft under my feet. Not a machine, not wires, something living. Then I heard it. An overlapping chorus of voices, some shouting, some whispering. Although I was unable to comprehend the words, I could feel them grabbing hold of me and pulling me in the direction of the open doorway. Then I heard my own voice, as clear as day, piercing through them all. "Come down." I staggered back so quickly that I nearly fell. Like jaws snapping shut, the doors crashed. I heard a new sound as I stood there trembling, my heart pounding. Steps. I turned, but there was nobody in the hallway. Slow, heavy steps continued to echo closer until the sound halted a few feet away. My breath became hazy as the air grew cold. Then, just beyond my field of vision, I noticed a slender, pale hand touch against the wall before vanishing from view. I took off running. I continued till I had returned to the cabin and locked the door. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it all the following morning. However, the bruise on my shoulder from colliding with the wall while running was sufficiently real. I promised myself that I would avoid it, but destiny had other ideas. Because my sister abruptly halted and scowled as we passed the stores together that day. "What is that?" She pointed to the exact spot where the elevator was hidden and inquired. She saw it, too, for the first time. The door is made of brushed steel. The light flickered. I didn't respond. I was unable to, because the elevator opened as soon as she pointed at it. And there I was, standing motionless inside. Only no. Its eyes were empty. But it donned my face, my clothes, and my precise expression, empty. It then slowly lifted its hand and beckoned her inside by curling one finger. After screaming and grabbing my arm, my sister and I ran away. Individuals turned to gaze, but the wall was solid by the time they did. No door, no elevator. She pleaded with me that night, but I was unable to explain. How could I explain to her that the ship was doing more than simply transporting us across the ocean? That it was also carrying something else, something that specifically desired me? The rumors continued after that. The sightings didn't either. Without fail, the elevator came up every night, awaiting. I also vowed every night that it was a little bit closer to my cottage. After that, I had trouble sleeping. Every groan of the hull and every creak of the ship sounded like elevator doors opening. Something inside of me fought my sister's desire to go to the crew and report what we had seen. I couldn't help but recall how the waiter froze when I inquired about the corridor. The timing of the captain's declaration felt off. They were already aware of this bad sensation I felt. When I woke up on the third night, the cabin was colder than it should have been. Even when she slept, my sister was shivering and snuggled up behind the cover. I noticed it as I sat up and rubbed my arms. The dim red light, not from the cabin itself, seeping under the door from the outside. Moving stealthily, I looked through the peephole. The hallway appeared to be vacant, but it wasn't. The elevator was waiting right across from our entrance, where there should have been only a smooth wall, light flowing out like blood from slightly open doors, and I noticed movement in that radiance. As though to pry the door open, my hand pressed against the frame and slowly curled its fingers. My sister was awakened when I staggered back so violently that my shoulder struck the wall. When she noticed the glow, too, she gasped. She took hold of my arm and dragged me to the balcony without saying anything. The sound of the waves hitting the hull below made us tremble as we stood there in the salty night air. We were both afraid to glance back at the cabin door. The elevator was gone by dawn. However, I kept thinking that it was no longer limited to that hallway. It was pursuing me. I made a desperate attempt later that day while my sister was sleeping. I requested a ship's deck plan when I walked down to guest services. With a courteous grin, the woman behind the counter gave me a beautiful booklet. Her smile, however, hardened when I pressed her, asking if there was a maintenance elevator beyond the stores. I insisted. "Sir, there are no elevators there." She lowered her voice and leaned in. Without saying another word, she turned around and left. "For your own good," she muttered. "Stop looking." I couldn't help myself that evening. I returned to the hallway. It appeared as if someone had attempted to obstruct the area by moving the plants. However, the elevator remained, buzzing softly. As soon as I got close, the doors slid open. I noticed more than shadows this time. The inside was no longer made of corroded steel. It appeared to go on forever. The same awful red glow illuminated a stairwell that went on and on. The walls had peeling wallpaper, and the rails had dark handprints. And they were louder than ever to me. The voices, they were no longer whispers. They were hurling insults. Echoing up the shaft were dozens, perhaps hundreds. A few were crying. A few were yelling. And I heard mine once more beneath it all. "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" I nearly stumbled backward. Just as the doors were about to close, something sprang up too quickly, a face crashing into the opening. Mine. Teeth, smiling. mouth overly wide, eyes as black as oil. The creature growled, "Come down." They slammed the doors. My sister was already awake, pallid, and staring at the door when I hurled myself inside the cabin after running back there. "I noticed it," she muttered. "It was present. When you were gone, I realized that we weren't merely being haunted. They were hunting us." Furthermore, the ship was too small to run continuously. By night 5, we had run out of excuses. I knew it wouldn't matter if my sister confronted the captain personally. Anything was too late for us, but every crew member I spoke to had the same hollow warning in their eyes. Don't look, don't ask, don't go near it. The elevator was no longer a strange oddity. It had picked us out. I could feel the weight of it before I could see it that night. When the sun set and the sea engulfed the light, there was a pressure pressing against my chest, like I was underwater. It was waiting in the corridor, its red glow dripping across the carpet like blood when I opened the cabin door. Before I could get any closer this time, my sister took hold of my hand. "Please, Daniel, don't." However, the voices had increased in volume and were now reverberating into the hallway. There were hundreds of them, and I could hear their names plainly. A few have an American sound, others are foreign. Then came one that chilled my veins. My sister's. Her name was screamed like a cry for assistance, her voice resonating up from the shaft. She turned pale. She lost her hold on me. The sound of her footsteps made me think for a moment that she was going to enter. When I pulled her away, the doors finally opened. The area beyond was no longer only a box. There were doors on either side of the long, unending hallway. There was a number on each door: 823, 910, 1,247, number of cabins, and fists hammered from behind those doors. The screams echoed. People pleading to be released were audible to me. "Those are the missing ones," my sister whispered as she held me tightly. "Daniel, they're still here, oh God." I wanted to flee. However, someone left before I could. I was the one, once more, but not in the same way. This older twin had gaunter skin that was wet from submersion and pallid. His eyes were wide with something I didn't want to mention, and he moved rigidly. His lips parted as he grabbed for me. Then he croaked, "Get in, before it pulls her instead." My sister yelled and dragged me back. I shut the cabin door after slamming it, and just for good measure, pushed the dresser up against it. We listened and sat trembling for hours. Outside, there was the faint sound of the elevator. We occasionally heard knocks on the door, 3 at all times, slow at all times. We believed it could be over when the knocks eventually stopped. Then we heard it, shortly before daybreak, not outdoors, not in the corridor, within the cabin, the gentle sound of doors opening. When I turned around, I saw the elevator standing against the wall where my bed had been. The cabin was filled with a red glare that engulfed everything. I tried to grab my sister after her scream tore the air, but the pull was too great. The whole room seemed to be crumbling into that entryway. Her fingers slipping out of mine and her voice calling my name as she was pulled into the red-lit hall is the last thing I remember before everything went dark. I awoke by myself, not on the ship, not in any cabin. I was in a white, empty room with no windows or doors. The air had a rusty and salty smell. There was a passenger list on the floor in front of me. I flipped through it, trembling. Names, on page following page. Thousands. And I noticed mine there, close at the bottom, as well as hers. In bold red writing, both crossed them out. Metal straining, the walls moaned. Above me, a faint ping reverberated. There was an elevator descending. It dawned on me then that I had never truly left that ship. Perhaps nobody ever does.